The corner keg sits at the junction of two forgotten highways in Sweetwater County, Wyoming. It's not on any tourist maps. The wooden sign hanging outside has been weathered to where you can barely read it, and the gravel parking lot is usually occupied by no more than 5 or 6 vehicles, mostly pickup trucks with Wyoming plates, occasionally an out-of-state sedan that took a wrong turn. I'd been a bartender here for almost a decade. It wasn't my plan to stay this long, but plans change. Sometimes they change because of opportunity, sometimes because of necessity. In my case, it was something else entirely. When Harris Reed, the previous owner, had hired me, he slid a folded piece of paper across the bar before I'd even filled out the employee paperwork. On it were 5 rules handwritten in faded blue ink. "Hey, these aren't suggestions," he said, his voice gravelly from decades of cigarettes and whiskey. "These are so you survive." I laughed. He didn't. 10 years later, I understand why. I've seen what happens when these rules are broken. I've been the one to clean up the aftermath, and I've added my own notes to that same piece of paper which I keep folded in my wallet at all times. So let me share these rules with you, along with what I've learned about why they exist. Maybe you'll think I'm paranoid. Maybe you'll think it's all coincidence. But if you ever find yourself in this part of Wyoming and you see the weathered sign for the corner keg, you might want to keep them in mind. Rule number 1. No one sits at the corner booth after 10 p.m. on Thursdays, ever. The corner booth at the corner keg is nothing special. Cracked red vinyl seating, a table scattered with cigarette burns and carved initials of patrons long gone. During the day, it's just another spot to sit. But on Thursday nights after 10 p.m., that booth remains empty. It wasn't always a rule. When I first started, I seated people there without a second thought. Until the 3rd Thursday of my employment. It was late October, the kind of bitter cold that Wyoming gets before the snow, when the wind cuts right through you. A group of 4 college students were stopping in on their way to a camping trip. They were loud, already half drunk but harmless, 2 guys and 2 girls. The bar was unusually busy that night. A group of pipeline workers had gotten paid and most of the regular tables were taken, so I directed the college kids to the corner booth. It was around 10:17 p.m. Harris caught my eye from across the room and shook his head subtly, but it was too late. The students had already piled in, ordering a round of beers and shots. For the first hour or so, everything seemed fine. They drank, laughed a little bit too loudly, and occasionally got up to play a song on the jukebox that somehow still worked. Around 11:30 p.m., I noticed one of the girls, a petite blonde named Mackenzie, kept glancing over her shoulder at the wall behind the booth. At first, I thought she had spotted a spider or some other bug. The corner keg isn't exactly known for its cleanliness, but there was nothing there, just the wood-paneled wall with a faded print of the Grand Tetons. As the night progressed, Mackenzie's behavior became increasingly erratic. She stopped participating in conversation. Her friends tried to engage with her, but she responded with only single-word answers, her eyes continually darting to that empty wall. By midnight, she wasn't speaking at all. One of the guys, her boyfriend Connor, finally seemed to notice something was wrong. He slid his arm around her shoulders, leaning in to whisper something in her ear. Whatever he said made her flinch. She shoved him away with surprising force, sending him sprawling onto the floor. "They won't stop staring," she said, her voice oddly flat. "All of them staring." Her friends exchanged worried glances. "There's nobody there, Mac," the other girl said gently. "Maybe we should head back to town, maybe take a rain check on the camping trip." Mackenzie didn't seem to hear her. She was now pressed against the wall, her fingers tracing patterns on the wood paneling as if following invisible lines. So many, all watching, all waiting. Connor got to his feet, obviously embarrassed and annoyed. She hasn't slept in like 2 days because of midterms, he explained to no one in particular. And she took some Adderall. She's crashing out, it's fine. He reached for her arm. Come on, Mac, let's go. What happened next happened so quickly that later when statements were taken, none of us could even agree on the sequence of events. Mackenzie grabbed a steak knife from the table. Connor lunged for her. There was a scuffle and a scream. And then Connor was on the floor again, but this time with the knife buried in his neck, just below his jaw. She had hit an artery, and it sprayed against the wall, the table, and the other students who sat frozen in shock. Mackenzie stood over him, her sweatshirt soaked in crimson, her expression completely blank. They told me to. They've been waiting a long time. By the time the town sheriff arrived, Connor had bled out on the sticky linoleum floor. Mackenzie offered no resistance when they had handcuffed her. She kept her eyes on the wall the entire time, nodding occasionally as if in conversation with somebody that none of us could see. The official report ruled that Mackenzie had experienced a psychotic break induced by sleep deprivation and stimulant abuse. She was committed to the Wyoming State Hospital in Evanston for a psychiatric evaluation. 3 weeks later, she was found hanging from a bedsheet in her room. According to the orderly who found her, her last words, scrawled on the wall in her own blood, were, "They're here too." After the bar eventually reopened, Harris had a handwritten reserved assigned to the corner booth that he put out every Thursday at precisely 10 p.m. When I finally asked him why, his answer was cryptic. That booth sits on the exact spot where 7 men were sentenced to hanging in 1888, he said. Every Thursday at 10 p.m. was when the judge would read the sentences. They would say he took pleasure in it, would have dinner first and make them wait. I didn't believe him. Thought it was just a local color to explain away a tragic incident. But curiosity got the better of me and I actually looked up what he said. The judge he had mentioned, Judge Fleming, he was a real person. And every Thursday after his dinner at precisely 10 p.m., he would convene court specifically to deliver death sentences. History records him as being unusually harsh, sentencing men to hang for crimes as minor as cattle rustling and petty theft. More disturbing still, 7 men had indeed been sentenced on the very spot where the corner keg now stands. The courthouse had burned down in 1926, and the bar had been built using some of these salvaged materials. I don't know if that girl Mackenzie really saw the ghosts of the condemned men or if it was just a tragic case of mental illness, but I do know that since that night, nobody has sat in that booth after 10 p.m. on Thursdays. Not ever. Rule number 2. If someone orders the Prospector's Special, check their teeth before serving. If any are gold, refuse service and call Vaughn immediately. When I first read this rule, I assumed the Prospector's Special was some local drink that I hadn't heard of. And I had no idea who Vaughn was or why anybody's dental work should determine whether they could be served. It took 3 months before anybody actually ordered it. He came in on a Tuesday afternoon when the bar was nearly empty. Just a couple of regulars playing cards in the back and an off-duty waitress having a beer at the counter. The stranger was tall and rail-thin, wearing a denim jacket despite the summer heat. His hair was gray and wild, sticking out from beneath a sweat-stained trucker cap. Nothing about him seemed remarkable except for the way that he moved. Deliberate, almost cautious, as if testing each floorboard before putting his full weight onto it. He took a seat at the far end of the bar, away from the other customers. "What can I get ya?" I asked, setting down a napkin. The man smiled, revealing a row of perfectly white, perfectly straight teeth that seemed at odds with his otherwise weathered appearance. "The Prospector's Special," he said, his voice surprisingly soft and refined. I froze, remembering the rule. The man was still smiling, and I found myself staring at his teeth. "Is something wrong?" he asked, the smile never faltering. No, just trying to remember what goes in that, I improvised. It's been a while since anybody ordered it. I needed to see his teeth more clearly. Were any of them gold? In the dim light of the bar, it was hard to tell. Sorry, how about I go check the recipe in the back? I suggested. In the meantime, can I get you some water? Oh, that would be lovely, he replied. I filled a glass with ice water and a lemon wedge, something that we didn't normally do, but I wanted to give him a reason to take a substantial drink. When I returned, I placed the water directly in front of him. Here you go. I'll just be a moment with that drink. As I had hoped, he took the glass and drank deeply. When he set it down, I saw it. A flash of gold from a molar on the left side of his mouth. My heart rate accelerated. I had no idea who Vaughn was or how even to contact him. Harris was off that day and I didn't want to call and risk the stranger overhearing. Actually, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I just remembered that we're out of one of the ingredients for the Prospector special. Can I interest you in something else? The man's smile disappeared immediately. No substitutions, he said flatly. I know you have what's needed. I'm sorry, but we really don't. Lying doesn't become you. He interrupted, his refined voice suddenly taking on a harsher edge. I can smell it right beneath us, rich and ready. Before I could respond, the door to the bar swung open and a stocky man in his 60s walked in. He had the leathery skin of somebody who had spent decades under the Wyoming sun, and cold blue eyes that surveyed the room with military precision. The stranger at the bar stiffened. Vaughn, he said, all pretense of refinement gone from his voice. Miller? The newcomer replied with a curt nod. You're a long way from home. The tension between them was palpable. The off-duty waitress quietly gathered her things and slipped out. The card players in the back stopped their game, watching warily. Oh, just passing through, the stranger, Miller said. Thought I'd stop in for a drink. This isn't your territory, Vaughn said. We had an agreement. Miller's smile returned, but there was nothing friendly about it. Well, agreements change, especially when there's word of a new vein. There's nothing here for you, Vaughn insisted. Move on. For a moment, I thought that Miller might argue or worse. His hand had drifted to his jacket pocket and I glimpsed something metallic there. But after a tense silence, he stood. Another time, he said. As he passed Vaughn, he added in a voice just loud enough for me to hear, You can't be everywhere at once, old man. After he left, Vaughn took the seat that Miller had vacated. Whiskey. Double. I poured it, my hand still shaking slightly. Who was that, and what's the Prospector special? Vaughn downed half the whiskey before answering. Yeah, Cooper Miller. Used to work the mines up near Atlantic City before they closed in the 70s. Now he prospects on his own. For gold? I asked, thinking of the rule about checking for gold teeth. Vaughn's expression was grim. Something more valuable and more dangerous too. He finished his drink and stood. If he comes back or anybody else orders that drink, you call me immediately. He scribbled a number on a napkin. Day or night. Over the next few years, 6 more people ordered the Prospector special. Each time I checked their teeth and each time I found at least one gold tooth. And each time I called up Vaughn, who would appear within minutes as if he had been waiting nearby. I never learned exactly what they were prospecting for, but years after that first encounter, a hiker found Cooper Miller's body in an abandoned mine shaft about 15 miles from the corner keg. According to the newspaper, his throat had been cut and several of his teeth had been extracted, including, I was certain, that gold molar. The coroner estimated he had been dead for at least 2 years. which was strange because I could have sworn that I had seen him in the bar just a month earlier, trying to order the Prospector Special again, flashing that same gold tooth. When I mentioned this to Vaughn, he just nodded and said, "They look more like the longer that they dig." I didn't ask for clarification. Some answers aren't worth knowing. Rule number 3, never allow Tracy Lorene to run a tab. Cash only, and all glasses must be collected immediately after she's done. Tracy Lorene first came to the corner keg on a stormy night in April. The power had gone out in half the county and we were operating by the light of gas lanterns and candles. She arrived alone, shaking rain from a black umbrella, her red hair gleaming like copper in the lantern light. She wasn't a local. That much was obvious from her city clothes and the rental car keys that she placed on the bar. But she wasn't exactly a tourist either. There was something purposeful in the way that she surveyed the room, her green eyes lingering on each patron as if searching for someone. "Gin and tonic," she said when I approached. "Hendrix if you have it." We did have it, though it wasn't often requested in a place where most customers ordered beer or well whiskey. As I prepared her drink, I felt her watching me, assessing. When I set the glass in front of her, she didn't touch it immediately. Instead, she placed a $100 bill on the bar. "I'd like to open a tab," she said. I remembered rule number 3. "Sorry, but we're cash only, per drink." Something flashed in her eyes. Annoyance, perhaps, or suspicion. "That seems unusually restrictive for a bar." "Owner's policy," I said with an apologetic shrug. "Especially during power outages when the credit card machine is down." She didn't believe me, that was clear, but she nodded and pushed the 100 closer. "Keep the change then, for now." I rang up her drink and put the change, a considerable amount, in a tip glass next to her. "Well, that's very generous," I said. "I'm hoping it buys some information." She replied candidly. "What kind of information?" Tracy took a sip of her gin and tonic, her green eyes never leaving mine. "I'm looking for a man named Kevin Lorene, my husband." She reached into her purse and produced a photograph. A tall man with a sandy hair and a beard, smiling against the backdrop of what looked to be a national park. He was on a research trip in this area. He was supposed to check in with his team 3 days ago, but nobody's heard from him. I studied the photo but didn't recognize the man. "I'm sorry to hear that, but he hasn't been in here. At least not while I've been working." "And when do you not work?" she asked. "Mondays and Tuesdays. Harris takes those shifts." She nodded, tucking the photo away. "I'll come back tomorrow to ask him then." Tracy finished her drink and ordered another. As per the rule, I immediately collected her empty glass, wiping down the bar where it had been. She raised an eyebrow. "Thorough." "Yeah, we try to keep the place clean," I said, though cleanliness had never been the corner keg's strong suit. She stayed for 3 more drinks, nursing each one slowly as she observed the other patrons. No one approached her, though several of the regulars cast curious glances her way. An attractive, well-dressed woman was an unusual sight at our establishment. When she finally left, I collected her last glass immediately. As I was wiping it, I noticed something strange. A faint reddish residue inside, too thick to be gin or tonic. I sniffed it cautiously. It had a metallic odor that reminded me of pennies. Blood. I turned to the door, but Tracy was already gone, her black umbrella bobbing in the rain as she walked to her rental car. The next night, she returned while Harris was behind the bar. I was in the back restocking supplies, but I heard their conversation. "Kevin Lorene," Harris said. "Yeah, he was in here about a week ago. Sat right at the bar asking a lot of questions about the old mines." "Did he say where he was staying?" Tracy asked. Yeah, mentioned he had set up camp near Fallen Horse Creek. Said he wanted to examine some rock formations up there. I froze because Harris and I both knew there had been no sandy-haired geologist in the corner keg recently. We knew every customer by sight if not by name. Harris was lying and I couldn't understand why. Tracy returned every night for a week. Each time she ordered gin and tonics, and each time I collected her glasses immediately. And each time I found that same reddish residue. On her 7th visit, she arrived much later than usual, nearly at midnight. The bar was empty except for Harris and me. We were about to close. One more drink, for the road. As I prepared it, I noticed her hands. In the dim light, I hadn't seen it before, but there were dark stains under her fingernails, the same reddish brown as the residue in her glasses. I served her drink and then retreated to the other end of the bar where Harris was counting the day's take. Why did you lie to her about her husband? I whispered. Harris glanced at Tracy, who was staring into her drink, seemingly lost in thought. Because, he said quietly, Kevin Lorene died in a mining accident in Colorado 12 years ago. I recognized his name from the papers. Whatever she's looking for, it isn't her husband. A chill ran down my spine. I looked at Tracy again. She was watching us now, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth as if she had heard every word despite the distance. She finished her drink in one swallow, placed a crisp 20 on the bar, and then stood to leave. Any luck finding your husband? I asked, unable to help myself. Tracy paused at the door. Oh, I found what I was looking for, she said. Kevin always had a way of disappearing into his work, but he leaves traces and I'm very good at following traces. After she left, I collected her glass. The residue was there, thicker than before, but this time there was something else. A small, hard object at the bottom of the glass. I fished it out with a napkin. It was a tooth, a human molar still bloody at the root. 3 days later, the body of a man was found near Fallen Horse Creek. According to the newspaper, he had been tortured extensively before being killed. Several of his teeth had been extracted while he was still alive. His hands had been removed, presumably to prevent identification through fingerprints, but based on personal effects found at his nearby campsite, authorities believed him to be Dr. Lawrence Keller, a geologist from the University of Colorado. There was no mention of Kevin Lorene. When I showed Harris the newspaper article, he just nodded grimly. Yeah, Keller was using Lorene's research, he said, picking up where he had left off at. Left off on what? I asked. Harris's expression was bleak. Some things are better left buried. Literally. Tracy Lorene never returned to the corner keg, but Rule 3 still remains in place, because sometimes she'll send others, men and women with clean clothes and city manners, always ordering gin and tonics, and always looking at the other patrons, searching for someone. Rule number 4. If the old wall phone rings, answer it by saying, All Souls, 5 minutes. Hang up immediately if the caller asks about the lost child. The wall phone in question is a relic, an old rotary phone mounted next to the restrooms. It's not connected to any line and it hasn't been for decades. That's what makes it so unsettling when it rings. The first time I heard it, I nearly dropped a tray of glasses. It was a Tuesday afternoon about 3 months into my employment at the corner keg. The bar was empty except for 2 elderly men playing checkers near the window. The sound was unmistakable. That shrill, insistent ring of an old telephone. I turned toward the source of the noise, expecting to see somebody's cell phone. Instead, though, I saw the ancient wall phone vibrating slightly with each ring. Before I could process what was happening, Harris emerged from the back room, walked directly to the phone and lifted the receiver. All Souls, 5 minutes, he said clearly and then listened for a moment before hanging up. He caught me staring. "Wrong number," he said casually, as if there was nothing unusual about a disconnected phone receiving calls. The second time it happened was a month later. This time I was alone in the bar during the afternoon lull between the lunch crowd and the evening rush. When the phone rang, I remembered the rule and approached it hesitantly. The plastic receiver felt unnaturally cold against my ear. "All Souls, 5 minutes," I said, trying to mimic Harris's matter-of-fact tone. There was silence on the other end, and then a sound like rushing water. Finally a voice, neither male nor female, neither young nor old, asked, "Is this about the lost child?" My blood ran cold. Without thinking, I slammed the receiver down. The phone rang again immediately. I didn't answer. When Harris arrived for his shift an hour later, I told him what had happened. "You did right," he said, his usual gruff demeanor softened by what seemed like genuine relief. "If they ask about the lost child, it's not a call we want to take." "Who's they? And what lost child?" I asked. Harris busied himself checking the liquor inventory, avoiding my gaze. "It's just an old system," he finally said, "from before cell phones when people around here needed to communicate quickly. All Souls was code for an emergency. 5 minutes meant how long until help would arrive." It was clearly not the whole truth, but it was all that I could get from him that day. Over the years, the phone has rung perhaps 24 times. Most calls follow the same pattern. I answer with the required phrase, there's a brief silence or some background noise, and then the caller hangs up. But 3 times now the caller is asked about the lost child. Each time I've hung up immediately as per the rule. The most disturbing incident occurred last winter during a blizzard that had left the corner keg as one of the few places with power thanks to our backup generator. A family had taken refuge with us, parents and 2 young children who had been driving through when their car slid off the road. The children, a boy about 10 and a girl around 8, were playing a makeshift game of checkers with bottle caps, while their parents huddled near our ancient space heater. It was nearly midnight, but nobody was going anywhere until the plows came through. That's when the wall phone rang. The father looked up surprised. "Somebody calling to check if you're open in the storm." I forced a smile. "Yeah, probably." And then I walked to the phone and answered as required. "All Souls, 5 minutes." The voice on the other end was clearer than it had ever been before. "We found the lost child. She's with us now." Before I could hang up, the little girl by the checkerboard suddenly stood, her head tilted as if listening to something. "Emma," the mother said. "What is it, honey?" The girl didn't respond. Instead, she turned slowly toward the wall phone, her eyes fixed on the receiver in my hand. "They're calling for me," she said in a flat voice that raised the hair on my arms. Her parents traded concerned looks. "Nobody's calling for you, Em," her father said. "Come and sit down." But Emma took a step toward the phone and then another. "I have to answer," she said. "They found me." I hung up quickly, but the damage was done. Emma began walking toward the phone with increasing determination. When her father tried to stop her, she scratched his face with a surprising strength, drawing blood. It took both her parents to restrain her as she thrashed and screamed. "Let me answer! They found me, I have to go!" Harris, who had been in the back, emerged at the commotion. Taking in the scene, he immediately went behind the bar and retrieved a small metal tin that I had never seen before. From it, he took what looked like a piece of rock salt, walked over to the struggling child and pressed it into her palm, closing her fingers around it. The effect was instantaneous. Emma went limp in her parents' arms, her eyes rolling back briefly before she blinked and looked around in confusion. "Why is everybody looking at me?" she asked, her voice normal again. "Did I fall asleep?" Her parents were too shocked to speak. Harris smoothly took control of the situation. "You were sleepwalking a bit," he told Emma kindly. "It happens sometimes when people are tired from a long drive." While Emma's mother took her to the restroom to wash up, Her father pulled Harris aside. I couldn't hear their conversation, but the man's face grew increasingly pale. He kept glancing at his daughter when she returned, a mixture of fear and protective love in his expression. The family left as soon as the roads were cleared the next morning. As they were walking out, I heard Emma ask, "Mommy, why did that phone lady know my middle name?" Her middle name, I later learned, was Alma, which translates from Latin as soul. I finally got the full story from Harris after they left. According to local legend, in the early 1900s, a child went missing in the area during a harsh winter. The entire community searched for days but found nothing. In desperation, the parents consulted a woman known for her special abilities who lived alone in the hills. The woman set up a system, a network of specially treated telephones in various locations around the county. Each phone could somehow connect to the others without conventional lines, through means that the legend doesn't specify. The search parties would use these phones to coordinate their efforts, always beginning conversations with all souls to invoke protection from whatever was out there. They never found the child, but sometimes the phone still rang, and sometimes whatever took that child so long ago was still looking for others. The lost child isn't a specific child anymore, Harris explained. It's any child that they can reach, any child who will answer. I don't know if I believe in such things, but I know what I saw that night with Emma, and I know that I will never engage with a caller who asks about the lost child. Some connections are best left severed. Rule number 5. If you noticed a customer's reflection behaving differently than the customer, act normal but place a salt shaker upside down on the table. Wait for Dev, Harris, or the sheriff to arrive. Of all the rules, this one seemed the most far-fetched when I first read it. People's reflections don't act independently. That's the stuff of scary movies, not real life. And then I met Clayton Renner. He came in on a slow Sunday evening in July when the sunset was painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. Average height, average build, brown hair cut short. Nothing remarkable except for the pallor of his skin, which suggested someone who didn't spend much time outdoors. He took a seat at the bar and ordered a beer. Nothing unusual there, but as I served him, I happened to glance at the mirror behind the bar, the long, somewhat spotted rectangle that stretches the length of the counter. Clayton's reflection was watching me, not Clayton himself. He was watching the bowl of peanuts that I had placed in front of him. But in the mirror, his reflected eyes followed my movement with an intensity that sent a cold spike of fear through me. I nearly dropped the glass that I was polishing. By the time I looked directly at Clayton again, he was sipping his beer, seeming oblivious. His reflection now matched his actions perfectly. Had I imagined it? Well, possibly. The lighting in here is notoriously bad, and the mirror itself is ancient, warped in places from age and humidity. But 10 minutes later, it happened again. Clayton was checking his phone, head down, fingers scrolling. In the mirror, his reflection was staring directly at an elderly couple in the corner booth, its lips moving slightly as if whispering something. I remembered the rule, salt shaker upside down, but the rational part of my brain still rebelled against what I was seeing. There had to be a logical explanation, a trick of the light, my imagination running wild after too many late shifts and weird experiences. And Clayton finished his beer and ordered another. As I served it, I deliberately kept my eyes on him, avoiding the mirror. He seemed pleasant enough, making small talk about the weather and asking how business was. "I'm not too busy tonight," he said, gesturing around the bar. "Yeah, Sundays are usually quiet," I replied. "Locals go to church in the morning, recover from hangovers in the afternoon, and stay home at night." He laughed, a normal human laugh. "And visitors? Do you get many of those?" "Some," I said cautiously. "Mostly people passing through on their way somewhere else." Clayton nodded thoughtfully. "And where do you think they're going? All those people just passing through?" Something about the question felt wrong. Too intense, too personal coming from a stranger. I made a non-committal sound and moved away to serve another customer. When I glanced at the mirror again, Clayton's reflection was gone entirely. Just an empty stool where he should have been reflected, though he was still very much sitting there in the physical world sipping his beer. My hands trembling slightly, I reached for a salt shaker. I kept my movements casual as I circled the bar, cleaning imaginary spills until I reached Clayton. I placed the upside-down salt shaker on the bar next to his beer. "Brings good luck," I said when he looked at it curiously. "Does it?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've always heard spilled salt was bad luck." "Only if you spill it," I replied, moving away again. I texted Dev, Harris's nephew who sometimes helped out at the bar, with a simple message. Rule number 5, now. Clayton nursed his second beer for nearly 40 minutes. During that time, his reflection continued to behave erratically, sometimes absent, sometimes staring at other patrons, sometimes appearing to whisper to someone just out of frame. At one point, when I was serving a group at the far end of the bar, I saw his reflection stand up in the mirror, while Clayton himself remained seated in reality. The reflection Clayton walked behind the seated reflections of other customers, leaning down as if to whisper in their ears. One by one, those customers shivered or rubbed their necks as if feeling a sudden draft. Relief flooded through me when the door opened and the sheriff walked in. He was in civilian clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, but I recognized the careful way that he looked around the room, his right hand hovering near his hip where his gun would normally be holstered. His eyes found mine and I nodded subtly toward Clayton. The sheriff took a seat 2 stools down from him and ordered a beer. For several minutes, nothing happened. They sat in silence, each drinking, neither acknowledging the other. And then the sheriff casually glanced at the mirror. Whatever he saw there made him stiffen momentarily before he regained his composure. "Evening," he finally said to Clayton. "Don't believe I've seen you around here before." Clayton turned to him with a pleasant smile. "Just passing through." "Where are you headed, if you don't mind me asking?" "Oh, wherever the work is," Clayton replied vaguely. "And what kind of work might that be?" The temperature in the bar seemed to drop several degrees. Clayton's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. "Collection. I collect things that people left behind." Sheriff nodded slowly. "Oh, is that right? Interesting line of work." "You'd be surprised what people abandon," Clayton continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Parts of themselves mostly. Things they don't even know they've lost until it's too late." In the mirror, I could see Clayton's reflection leading toward the sheriff's reflection, its mouth stretched in a grin far wider than any human mouth should be capable of. The sheriff didn't flinch. "I think it's time for you to move along. We don't much care for collectors around here." Clayton's expression remained pleasant, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "I haven't finished my beer." Yes, you have." The standoff lasted perhaps 5 seconds, though it felt much longer, and then Clayton shrugged, placed a 20 on the bar and stood. "Another time, perhaps," he said. He glanced around the bar one last time, his gaze lingering on certain patrons. This place is rich with potential acquisitions. As he walked to the door, I couldn't help but check the mirror one final time. Clayton's reflection wasn't walking with him. It was standing at the bar, staring directly at me, its face contorted in a silent scream of rage. And then he was gone, and the reflection vanished with him. "Lock the door," the sheriff ordered, already on his feet. He flipped the sign to closed while I turned the deadbolt. What was that? What did I just see? The sheriff ran a hand over his face. He suddenly looked much older than his 50-something years. Now, they have different names in different cultures. Doppelgangers, fetch husbands, reflective mimics. I call them collectors. Collectors of what? Identities, lives. He glanced at the salt shaker that I'd placed on the bar. The salt disrupts their ability to fully sync with their physical counterparts, makes the reflection lag and act independently. It's how we spot them. So that wasn't Clayton in the mirror, it was something else. Sheriff shook his head. Clayton Renner probably doesn't exist. What you saw both in person and in the mirror was a collector. But they need physical and reflective forms to work in tandem. The salt forced a separation between the two. What would have happened if you hadn't come? Best case scenario, he would have found a vulnerable target, isolated them, and replaced them. Worst case, the sheriff gestured to the bar full of people. He might have tried for multiple. Over the years, I've had to invoke Rule 5 7 more times. Each instance involved a different person, different faces, different names, different stories. But they all shared certain characteristics, an unusual interest in the other customers, odd questions about passing through, and of course the reflections that behaved independently when salt was present. I've learned to spot them more quickly now. The slight mismatch between expression and words, and the way they study people as if memorizing details, the stillness that they have when they think no one's watching. So there you have them, the 5 rules that I use at the corner keg to keep things going and everything running smoothly. I've followed them faithfully for over a decade now through quiet nights and busy ones, and I don't see any reason why I would stop following them now. Andrew Harrington, Malcolm Black, Mark Norman, Damon McCory, Kathy McGuire, SWAT, Justin Fotenauer, Mina Lynn, Takio Zarilla, Sanjay Anthem, Sleepy Shroomy, Dragon Slayer 048, Richard French, Miss Eldridge, Jimmy Griffin, Shelley Bruno, Leon Knott, Ty Can't Play, That One Woodsman, Talamagara, Meek Asher, Die Screaming, Nelson Asada, MB Massacre 91, Rain, Big Country Ellen,